One of the topics this morning is that Brandon Aiyuk went on with Shannon Sharp and Ocho Cinco and talked a little bit about his contract. And I don't know how much we can take from the contract talks or whatnot, but the one thing I thought was interesting is Aiyuk said when I was there earlier this morning. So obviously he's in the facility, he's working out, he's trying to get a deal done. We'll see if it gets done or not, but he's there. I mean, it's not like, he's working out on his own. He's working out in Santa Clara with the Niners.
Yeah, that really stood out to me too. And I thought it was a pretty good interview from Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco. And you don't oftentimes see Brandon Aiyuk in that type of environment where he's able to just kind of be laid back, relaxed. He doesn't do a lot of interviews in general. And I thought he made some really fair points. I thought that was pretty interesting that he's been at the facility and he's been working out. And he was there as early as yesterday, Thursday, March 28th. And for him, he didn't say anything controversial. He said, look, I want to be here. I want to win. We have professionals working this out on both sides, my camp, the Niners side, and hopefully we're able to come to an agreement on a contract extension, and hopefully we can keep it professional. And Aiyuk has points to make there. He was one of the best wide receivers in the game this past year, and he is so pivotal to this offense and the continuity and the relationship that he's been able to develop and the rapport he's been able to develop with Brock Purdy. I think it's really important for Purdy in the long haul to have a weapon like this, a complete wide receiver who's a great route runner, awesome footwork. Aiyuk really embodies everything that the Niners are about. Player development, a guy who plays the game the right way, with toughness, with physicality, with swagger, and I only think that he's only going to continue to get better because literally every year that he's been in the league, his numbers have gone up.
It is interesting that even though Lynch says over and over and over again, for some reason my mic is jumping around today, but even though Lynch has said over and over again that, the 49ers have no interest in trading Aiyuk, there seems to be this constant drumbeat that Aiyuk is going to be traded at some point. And I'm not sure where that's coming from. Bleacher Report has an article out today where they project the Niners to trade Aiyuk to the Chargers for their second round pick, which is 37 overall, and their sixth round pick, which is 181. What's your belief on this? I mean, I know lots of people, love Aiyuk, but then the bottom line is, are the Niners going to spend $60 million on wide receivers? What do you think?
Well, for me, the Los Angeles Chargers make no sense because they got rid of Mike Williams. They traded away Keenan Allen because they can't afford those wide receivers. They had to ask Joey Bosa as well as Khalil Mack to restructure their contracts because going into free agency and the tampering period, they were more than $20 million over the salary cap number. So I don't think that the Chargers make any sense at all because if they were to acquire Brandon Aiyuk, they would have to give him a contract extension, which pays him about $25 million per year. It is certainly an interesting scenario and situation that the Niners are in here. You get the Arik Armstead deal off the books, and I know he felt disrespected by the Niners organization, but they're paying for future performance, not past performance, and they're paying Malik Cunningham half the salary, and the last 2 years he's been the more productive player. But Fred Warner, do a contract extension. Charvarius Ward, do a contract extension. Diamador Lenore is going to be up for one. We'll see what happens with Talanoa Hufanga coming off the ACL. He's in the last year of his rookie deal. And then Jed York made it be known that the starting point for Brock Purdy is going to be about $40 million per year. And San Francisco is paying top dollar to a bunch of other players on their roster, from Trent Williams to Christian McCaffrey to Nick Bosa to Fred Warner to Kyle Juszczyk. And if they want to continue to keep Ward, he's making $14 million per year. L'Jarius Sneed is now making $19 million per year. He has the argument to make that he could be within that $19 to $20 million range. So you canvass this Niners roster. We've been talking about this for a really long time. They're a little bit cash strapped right now. What benefits them is that they're always good at pulling off these financial gymnastics and manipulating the cap to a certain degree. The increasing salary cap is only going to continue to help San Francisco. They've mastered this compensatory pick formula, but in that wide receiver room, it's a legitimate question. Can you afford to pay Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel both in the range of $24-25 million per year, to the point where you're paying two wide receivers about $50 million? That's a lot to invest in the same position when you're going to have needs elsewhere. And that's also why it's important for the Niners to hit on some picks in this draft. And I think they got to fortify the offensive line, because if you can hit on some of these draft picks along the offensive line, they're cost controlled for the next several years. That's why it's been so important for the Niners to hit on some of these mid to late round picks who have ended up being really impactful players, from Dre Greenlaw to Diamador Lenore to Talanoa Hufanga, and the list goes on, because you have them under contract for the next 4 years, first round picks a fifth year if you exercise that fifth year option, and they're really affordable here. And a reason why the Niners have been so successful is the blend of them drafting and developing players and then taking care of their own, which I think is important culturally, especially when you have premium players on your roster, but then blending that with some of those other cheaper free agents, but also some of these players that you draft in the mid to late rounds who aren't making that much money. For instance, Brock Purdy has not made $1 million yet and won't until the fourth and final year of his rookie contract. He's been one of the best bargain deals in the NFL. For the impact that Brandon Aiyuk has had on this offense, he too has been an impact player that's come at a pretty affordable rate and a bargain. But now it's time for Brock Purdy to cash in if he has a 2024 like he had in 2023. And it's time for Brandon Aiyuk to cash in. And he even said with Shannon Sharp and Ocho Cinco, I just want to get paid what I think I'm worth. And there's that saying out there, Larry, you, me, everybody watching, you are worth what somebody is willing to pay you. And if the Niners don't want to pay Aiyuk, I guarantee you somebody else will.
If you asked me what's going on with the Niners wide receivers, I would say that they would love to move off of Deebo, but can't. There's no deal that makes sense to move off of Deebo before June 1st. So that's not happening. But I think they, would rather go long term with Aiyuk. For some reason, my mic keeps going down. Aiyuk over Deebo. Then they went to the Western Kentucky Malachi Corley, pre-draft meeting or whatever at Western Kentucky. I think they're going to try to get Corley and move off of Deebo at some point. What do you think?
Yeah, I think going into this year, we're going to see the same wide receiver core that we saw in 2023. And it's one of the better receiving cores in the NFL. And that was a big reason why Brock Purdy was so successful, because of the play calling, the play design, the system from Kyle Shanahan, in addition to all of the weapons, and Brock Purdy just being a legitimate quarterback in this league. I think the sample size is long enough where what he's been able to do now in a season and a half of starting games and basically having a 4-1 record in the playoffs, he's legit. But I think that after 2024 is when you start to look at a future where you have Brandon Aiyuk, a player that you draft at the wide receiver position, whether it be Malachi Corley, who's very similar as far as build and speed to Deebo Samuel, and Xavier Legette out of South Carolina, who is 6'1", 6'2", 220 pounds, very similar build to Deebo Samuel. And then going into 2025, you're paying Aiyuk about $25 million per. You re-sign and extend Jawan Jennings. He's not going to cost all that much money relative to some of the other wide receivers across the NFL, with that market booming and guys like Calvin Ridley getting $23 million. And then you draft that rookie where he is going to come on an affordable price tag for the duration of his entire rookie deal, which then allows you to allocate that money that you were paying to Deebo Samuel, and you can use it elsewhere. A contract extension for Brock Purdy, trying to fortify other areas on this roster. And for Deebo in 2025, a post-June 1 cut, $6.6 million in dead money, $17.5 million in cap savings. I think the Niners look at that, and that's the time to let go of Deebo if you were to. And of course, you can find a trade partner too if he has a really good season and increases his value. And then you don't have to worry as much about some of those financial implications. Because right now, if you cut him post June 1, $11 million in dead money, and you save $17.2 million. As far as the trade money here, if the Niners next year were to trade him pre-June 1, $15 million in dead money, $9 million in cap savings. And then if they traded him in 2025, $6.6 million in dead money and $17.5 million in cap savings. Those numbers, when you're trying to run a business here and you're trying to manipulate the salary cap and you're trying to free up money and you have a quarterback who is going to be due probably $45, maybe $50 million realistically. If he plays as well in 2024 as he did in 2023, that's pretty appealing for San Francisco. It's a tough, emotional decision to make, and a lot of fans don't like to have these conversations, but if you want to have a deep roster that is vast with different talent, and if you want to keep Brock Purdy and Brandon Aiyuk around, Diamador Lenore contract extension, and you want to continue to pay Nick Bosa $34 million average annual value, those are the difficult decisions that you have to make realistically.
Hold on. There we go. And you're going to have to make some really prudent decisions elsewhere in your roster, which might mean that you're going to have to move Arik Armstead at some point. What's your feeling there on Armstead? Do you think Armstead does wind up getting moved? And Armstead has moved, but do you think the Niners have dissed Armstead by their offer? They only offered him $6 million. How do you view that? I mean, they want to be known as the team that takes care of their own players, but then, a guy like Armstead, who's been a leader, he's out the door. He's in Jacksonville now, and people are asking the question, $6 million? That seems really low for Arik.
Here's the thing. They did take care of Arik Armstead. They drafted him in the first round. They paid him a total of $81 million over 9 years with the organization. But in business, in sports, you're not paying for past performances. You are paying a future investment for what you're going to get from that player in the future. And from the Niners standpoint, I completely see where they were coming from. And keep in mind that the word fan is short for fanatic, and Arik Armstead has the right to feel the way that he does. And he wanted to test the market to see what his worth was. And the Jacksonville Jaguars ended up paying him a lot of money. Good for him. He was able to get an offer that he thought was respectful and that he was deserving of. And the Niners wanted to move his salary down to $6 million. Here's why. He's going to be 31 years in November. There have been signs of decline. He is a declining player as far as the production. He's played in 21 games in the last 2 years. He has one double-digit sack season in his entire career. It came back in 2019, and the 49ers found his replacement in Malik Collins, who has been more productive the last 2 years. He's 28 years old, younger, more durable. Here's the most important thing. He's half the price. So I get it. He's a Sacramento guy, NorCal guy, leader in the locker room, face of the organization, team captain, Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee. I'm sure it wasn't easy for the Niners to have to make that decision. And Arik Armstead has the right to feel disrespected, because when you're making as much money as he was, $18 million, and then you bump that down to $6 million, that is a significant decrease in pay. Like, let's say I'm making $200,000 and Chat Sports comes to me and says, we want to bump your salary down to $60,000. I'm like, I can't do that. I've got to go elsewhere, because that's pretty disrespectful for me and what I give this company. But you've been injured a lot. The production has gone downhill. I think the Niners see the writing on the wall that at 31 years old, for a guy who's 6'7" and has had foot issues and knee issues, it was time to move on. And it was better to do it early as compared to late. And I'm excited about the acquisition of Malik Collins, because he's coming in younger, more durable, more productive, half the price. And I think he's a really good player. Him and Isaac Yiadom, two underrated additions for the Niners this offseason.
Yeah, I like Armstead. He's a good guy and everything, but he just, he's got chronic injuries. And chronic injuries don't typically get better. So that's kind of how I see that. Colin Coward says the 49ers are the next Cowboys after they pay Purdy. Do you agree? I mean, Coward loves the sky is falling narratives. He builds up on the sky is falling. But what do you think? If the Niners give Purdy $50 million, are they going to slide into becoming the Dallas Cowboys that are good but not good enough?
This is always the issue that teams run into when you pay quarterbacks big time dollars. And that's why teams have really tried to follow that Carson Wentz Eagles model, the Joe Burrow Bengals model. And that's what the Niners are literally doing right now with Brock Purdy. They're really trying to capitalize on winning a Super Bowl as that quarterback is on their rookie deal, because then you can afford to have a roster like the Niners, which is the most talented in the NFL. You can afford to have a really good team with the Cincinnati Bengals and have those good surrounding pieces. The Houston Texans are following that model right now, where they're giving Danielle Hunter a 2-year deal worth $49 million, and they're spending all over the place in free agency on short-term contracts worth a lot of money. Why? Because they understand that they have flexibility. CJ Stroud is going into year 2. They can exercise that 5th-year option. That's 4 more years of team control. Then you backload that contract extension for CJ Stroud, and you can continue to be a Super Bowl contender over the next several years. And for the Niners and Brock Purdy here, he's been literally the best bargain deal in the NFL, making $900,000 this past year for the production that he gave them, where statistically he was a top 5, top 10 quarterback in every category, and he led you to the Super Bowl, and you're paying him less than $1 million. Now, he's going to try to make up for that lack of pay in cashing in on this new deal. And a lot of people are like, you think Brock Purdy would take a hometown discount? I don't think so. Nor should he even go to a point where he's even thinking about that, because he's earned this new deal. But you look at the top 10 quarterbacks in the league right now, and then you also look at the teams, right? And how they're built. Joe Burrow is making $55 million. Justin Herbert, 52.5. Lamar Jackson, 52. Jalen Hurts, 51. Kyler Murray, 46. Deshaun Watson, 46. Kirk Cousins at 45. Patrick Mahomes, 45. Josh Allen, 43. Matthew Stafford at 40. A good example here of what can happen is, of course, the Dallas Cowboys, where during Dak's rookie contract, bolstered up the offensive line, had a really good running game, really good receivers, and an awesome defense. But since they started paying him a lot of money, they had to gut their roster a little bit. They became too Dak reliant, and in my opinion, they've gotten worse. Josh Allen, look at what the Bills did this offseason. They let go of so many marquee players. Why? Because that contract extension for Josh Allen, making him one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL, is starting to set in this year. But there is flexibility, there is maneuverability here where you can backload these deals so that Purdy, next year will be the final year of his deal. And then let's say that real money starts to come in 3-4 years down the line, you can still pay players top dollar in the meantime until that contract really starts to set in. The issue, once Purdy's average annual value starts to hit the salary cap, is he going to be able to carry the boats? Is he going to be able to shoulder the load and put this team on his back and make everybody better, like a Patrick Mahomes? And Patrick Mahomes and that Chiefs offense this past year was not good. They started to finally find a groove in the NFL playoffs, but he didn't have really good wide receiver talent. Rashee Rice was his number one. Of course, he had Travis Kelce, but that's the reality of when you pay these quarterbacks a lot of money, is that once that contract starts to come into play, you're unable to really have a roster as deep and as loaded as what the Niners have right now, and you're seeing that with the Dallas Cowboys. So, of course, that's a concern, but I have more confidence in this front office. I have more confidence in this coaching staff. I have more confidence in Jed York as compared to Jerry Jones. Up and down, Niners are a better run organization, a better roster, and a better coaching staff than Dallas.
If we look to the draft, that sounds like the 49ers want an offensive tackle or maybe a defensive tackle. What do you think? Are they more likely to go offense or defense in the draft at 31?
I'm always the advocate of best player available. And let's just say a Nate Wiggins, a Kool-Aid McKinstry, one of the really good cornerbacks falls to number 31. You got to draft that player, right? And then you have that cornerback opposite of Charvarius Ward. You have Diamador Lenore in the slot. This year, those are your three cornerbacks. And then if you want to let Ward walk because he's due a lot of money, do you move Lenore to the outside? And then you have that rookie draft pick as the other outside corner, and then you can find a slot. You also have Isaac Yiadom, who I mentioned was really, really good in filling in for Marshawn Lattimore last year. I'm interested to see how he factors into the equation because the analytics, Pro Football Focus, they all had him very, very highly graded. And he was a really good ball hawking corner who made a lot of plays on the football. But, theoretically, if a really good corner falls there, can you pass up on that player? Let me throw this out there. What if Brock Bowers is still around at 25? You have to start to plan for the post-George Kittle days. Do you try to trade up for a player like Brock Bowers, who is a premium blue-chip generational tight end? That's a player that I would draft knowing that the Niners have offensive line issues. The good thing about this offensive line class, it is deep with centers who you can find in the second round in addition to the first round. It's deep with guards who you can find at 31 and in that second round. It's deep with a couple of tackles who you can find at 31 and in that second round too. And I think what the Niners have done here, they've opened themselves up to have a lot of flexibility with some of the free agent moves that they've made, how they've built this roster, where there's going to be a really impactful player who can impact this football team and be a plug-and-play guy to a certain degree from day one. If you do go offensive lineman, I've seen a lot of people say Niners don't trust rookies. San Francisco, you can't rely and trust an offensive lineman to start over Colton McKivitz in year one. Yes, you can. Offensive linemen are very cerebral players. And if there's a position group for a player that can play right away, oftentimes it is the offensive line. Creed Humphrey for the Kansas City Chiefs stepped in right from the jump, and he ended up being one of the best centers right away. And you look at Colton McKivitz, I can't believe how Kyle Shanahan said he's done a hell of a job at right tackle for us this week. We have a lot of confidence in him. He's one of the real leaders on our team. I thought he did a hell of a job playing this year. And I'm like, hold on. Is that the standard? McKivitz gave up 47 total pressures and 9 sacks this year, 12 more pressures in 3 playoff games. He was the 47th highest graded tackle in the National Football League. And you're telling me he's done a hell of a job? I know you don't want to throw one of your players under the bus, but come on, let's be real here. To me, he's not a starting caliber tackle in the National Football League. And if you can address right tackle or guard in the draft, I think that just improves your football team in general for 2024.
I think it sets up for the Niners to look for a defensive tackle. It just seems like that's their, we can talk tackles all the time, but then when they get to the draft, it's always a defensive player. They love their defensive, tackle drafts. My son tweeted out, he said this offseason, Jordan Morgan has been mocked to the Niners quite a bit. The Arizona kid, offensive tackle. He's got 32 and 7/8 inch arms, which is 9th percentile for arm length, which is pretty low. That's pretty low. In the last 10 seasons, according to my son, there have been 0 Pro Bowl tackles with arms shorter than 33 inches. So Joe Staley had 33.5, and Penei Sewell's got 33.25. So it's not like you can't have success with 32-inch, 33-inch arms. But what do you think? I mean, do you look at Jordan Morgan and say, you know what, short arm tackle, he could be a guard, don't draft him in the first round? And do you think they're more likely to go D tackle over O tackle at 31?
Yeah, I think defensive tackle is a real possibility. And you and I have talked about how defensive tackle could be the position, because you look at how the Niners roster is set up right now. You have Javon Hargrave, you have Malik Collins, and then as your backups, you have Kalia Davis, you have Kevin Givens. You're a little bit light there. I think it's time for San Francisco to really look at defensive tackle, and it makes sense for the timeline and the current construction of this team right now to draft a defensive tackle, because at some point you need that youth movement. You need one of those developmental pieces along the interior of this defensive line, and there are some pretty good ones that I would keep an eye out for. At number 31, Byron Murphy out of Texas, Jerzon Newton out of Illinois. Tavondre Sweat out of Texas is closing in on 400 pounds. I think he's more of a nose tackle compared to a defensive tackle, but if you only want him to be a run-stuffing defensive tackle who plays 1 or 2 downs and isn't a 3-down player, that could be an option for San Francisco. I know you and I really like Michael Hall out of Ohio State. And then Braden Fisk out of Florida State tested extraordinarily well at the NFL Combine. I think all 5 of those players could be in play for the Niners at number 31. And then Jordan Morgan is certainly an interesting player from Arizona. He played offensive tackle in college, but because of the short arms, and the Niners do prioritize offensive tackles who have longer arms, it just helps you with leverage and keeping those edge rushers contained. He played really well at offensive tackle for Arizona. Brad from SF Niners is an offensive line guru and broke down some tape of Jordan Morgan. And I was impressed with what he was able to do against some NFL caliber defensive ends in the Pac-12. Braylon Trice against Jordan Morgan was a really, really good matchup. Leitu Latu at UCLA was matched up against Jordan Morgan, and he was able to hold his own. That's a player who can play guard right from the jump. That gives you flexibility with John Feliciano, who can play center, left guard, right guard. And then maybe in the future, he can move out to offensive tackle. I'm not as worried about the short arms as some other people might be, but that's just kind of an organizational preference for San Francisco. I do want to throw out another offensive tackle here who I think could be a sneaky name in round 1, maybe even in round 2, and that's the kid out of Yale, Karan Amagaji. He's 6'5", 326 pounds. He's garnering a lot of buzz right now. He didn't start playing football until mid-high school, and he's really climbed up draft boards right now. Had a really good pro day. He's tested really well. Some offensive line people really like him. He's got the ideal size. He's a little bit raw, but again, if you drop that developmental tackle, you can always put him at guard in the meantime, and then you can pop him to the outside at some point in the future.
Yeah, Amagaji's interesting for sure, just simply because he's got, I think, 37-inch arms. I mean, he's got huge, long arms, maybe the longest in the class, but I think he had a quad injury this
He
year
did have a
as
quad
well.
injury,
So
yeah, at the end of the year.
time. He's a little bit of a developmental guy. I love Zach Frazier, the
Frazier.
center from West Virginia. I think if
Yep.
they could get Frazier at 31, that would be a steal. They brought in Brandon Dorless of Oregon for a workout in Santa Clara, one of their 30 workouts in Santa Clara. What do you think of Dorless? He's a 290-pound defensive end.
Yeah, and like what I said about defensive tackle, I kind of feel that way about edge rusher too. You have Nick Bosa, who's still a young player, and you have Yetur Gross-Matos, who's still on that developmental stage. Leonard Floyd is on the wrong side of 30. I'm not sure we're going to get anything from Drake Jackson at this point. He's flashed at moments, but if Chop Robinson is a player who falls to 31, or he's there at 25, 26, that's a player that I would trade up for, because I think of edge rusher like defensive tackle. You got to replenish the cupboard a little bit to a certain degree and get some younger players in here, because you know you're going to have Bosa for the long haul. Who else are you going to have along that defensive line? That youth movement has to start right now. And Chop Robinson is one of my favorite players in this draft. Brandon Dorless is certainly an interesting option as well. And I don't put as much stock in the combine formal interviews and meetings as I do with some of these 30 visits, because the 30 visits, teams are bringing these players in because they want to get to know the player. So for me, clearly shows that the 49ers are interested in a player like Brandon Dorless, and they look at him at 6'3", 283 pounds, really good athlete. Testing numbers at the NFL Combine were pretty damn good. You put him under the watchful eye of Chris Kosarek, and you're like, okay, we can develop this player into a pretty stout defensive end edge rusher. He ran a 4.85 40-yard dash at that size. That's pretty damn good.
You're there in PA. What did you think of Chop compared to Adisa Isaac? You know, I kind of like Isaac as an athlete. He's 6'4", 250. Robinson's 6'3", 255, and had incredible workout numbers. But what do you think of the two? Forget the workout numbers, just their tape.
Yeah, I kind of look at Isaac as a very similar prospect as Odafe Owe, who also went to Penn State. And I talk about them similarly because they're a little bit raw. They're still developing as players. They have a lot of potential. Owe went to a perfect fit, even though he just suffered a pretty bad injury recently in the Baltimore Ravens. That always does such a great job of extracting the best out of some of these defensive players because of the scheme, the player development, the overall coaching, and just having other really good players along that defense. So Isaac has kind of fallen under the radar because Chop Robinson is getting all this buzz. Chop Robinson models his game after TJ Watt and Nick Bosa. He's drawn some Micah Parsons comps, although I think that's a little bit too much just because they both went to Penn State. But they're comparing him to Micah Parsons because he's got one of the quickest first steps out of any edge rusher in this class. His 10-yard shuttle, 40-yard dash were exceptional. His athletic testing numbers were superb. And you're always willing to build off a foundation if you have that quick first step with a little bit of bend and the strength. And Chop Robinson is a player who's 21 years old. Now, Isaac is certainly an interesting player. Robinson's getting that buzz. He's like the big sexy name, whereas his teammate is starting to fall under the radar a little bit. At 31, I think it might be a little bit too high, and I don't think it's within the range for the Niners to take him in the second round all the way back at number 63. But Penn State has one of the best strength and conditioning programs in the entire country. They have done a tremendous job of developing pro prospects. Hasn't resulted in big time wins because James Franklin's kind of a fraud going up against top 5, top 10 teams. But as far as finding and developing NFL level talent, you look at rosters across the entire NFL, a lot of Penn Staters are big time players across the league right now. And I think that both of those defensive ends could end up being really good players. Chop Robinson right now, situational pass rusher because he's a little bit young. But man, if you develop him, sky is certainly the limit.
Dumpster Fire Dan says Darius Robinson from Missouri can play tackle and D end. He was the practice player of the week in Mobile. What do you think of Robinson in this scheme? Do you see Aldon Smith? Do you see, is he kind of like a combo DN D tackle, or do you see him dropping weight and becoming more of a every down D end? Because almost all the mocks have Robinson sitting right there for them. And in a lot of ways, there's a lot to like there.
He's one of my favorite edge rushers in this class, too. He's not like in that initial first tier, but he's probably like a top 5, top 7 defensive end edge rusher in this class. He's really tall. He's 6'5". And this past year, he had 8.5 sacks with Mizzou. And that's that type of player. You take him at 31, he can be a situational pass rusher this year, and then he can grow into being an every down type of player. Really started to burst on the scene in 2023 when he had those 8.5 sacks, because he's actually a 5-year college player where he barely played in 2019, barely played in 2020, played a little bit more in 2021, but only had 1 sack in those 3 years. 2022 has 3.5 sacks, and then in 2023, 8.5 sacks. So the late bloomer, lack of production, a little bit of concern, but the Niners love those types of long, tall defensive ends. That's why they fell in love with Yetur Gross-Matos, who John Lynch was just raving about from the NFL owners meetings. And you look at the Charles Omenihu's of the world, and Arden Key, played inside, played outside. This is a player who might be able to do some of that. And what did John Lynch say this week? We've always been at our best when we have one of those guys. Last year, they didn't really have that guy. They mixed with Chase Young, lining up outside and inside. They experimented with Cleveland Ferrell doing a little bit of that as well, but they weren't as like impactful noticeably as a Arden Key, Charles Omenihu. I think Darius Robinson, Yetur Gross-Matos are kind of in that mold.
Last one. I know you got to jump. If you said draft crush that makes no sense, as we get closer, we watch more guys in the draft, and it's some of them just don't make positional sense for the Niners. One guy that I just love is Blake Corum for Michigan. Yeah. I just think he's a tremendous player. Is there any player that you've watched that you said, you know what? I don't know if it makes sense, but I sure love the player.
Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. I think that he has the possibility to be the second best wide receiver in this class. If he's better than Marvin Harrison, if he's better than Malik Neighbors, if he's better than Rome Odunze, I'm not going to be surprised at all. I think this is a really special player. Some people point to his inconsistent production, but Quinn Ewers, quarterback for Texas, was a little bit up and down. He's 6'2", everything to his route tree. I like his build. He ran a 4.34 40-yard dash, a 1.52 10-yard split, vertical jump of nearly 40, and his broad jump 11.4, and played at Georgia. And when you play at Georgia coming out of high school, you are a special, special player. Then he transfers to Texas and ended up having a really, really good season. That's a player who the Niners definitely don't need to draft a player like that. But if he falls in that 20, 25 range, if he's there for 31, you don't necessarily need to take him. But if he's there and you go best player available strategy, I think the Niners would be stupid to not take him. I think he's a really, really special player. And I just love the speed, physicality, jump ball, deep ball. You can use him as a gadget guy. He can make people miss. He can run through you. He's a really explosive athlete who, again, I think if he's the best wide receiver in this class, I won't be surprised.
My friend Dan says the Niners just signed Brock Wright to an offer sheet, tight end from the Lions. Not Detroit has 5 days to match. Okay. Not a surprise position, huh? They were going to look for a veteran tight end.
Yeah, he's 25 years old. I'm not too familiar with him. He went to Notre Dame. He was undrafted in 2021. The more I think about it, the more I think that the Niners really need to address tight end. You have to start planning for the post-George Kittle days. But here's the thing, too. Imagine what this offense could look like if you had a legitimate tight end too. And Brayden Willis and Cam Latu are the backup tight ends right now. They're not good enough. Ross Dwelley, Charlie Warner, they could block. They weren't pass catchers. If you get a Jadavion Sanders, you get a Jared Wiley out of TCU, you get a Brock Bowers, and you go 12 personnel with Kittle and that tight end, with Jawan Jennings, Brandon Aiyuk, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, I think it makes this offense even better. So backup tight end, number 2 tight end, who then can become the George Kittle replacement down the road because, again, financial implications going to make things a little bit tight with Brock Purdy, Brandon Aiyuk potentially being on the books. Those are tight ends that are draft crushes for me in addition to A.D. Mitchell.